Welcome back, everyone, to FUSION22. If you are just joining us online, then hello from London, wherever you are in the world. Do use the function in the chat and tell us where you're watching from, and do send in your questions at any time during the session using the little Q&A box. Do also check out our virtual exhibitors as well. So we're now taking a closer look at the fusion energy supply chain and asking how fusion is going to transition to an industry. We have our panel of experts here, chaired by Matt Gallimore from Assystem, Ross Morgan, who's Commercial Director at Tokamak Energy, Heike Freund, who is Chief Operating Officer at Marvel Fusion in Germany, and finally, Greg Willets, who is Vice President of Technology and Cyber Security Solutions at Jacobs. Over to you, Matt.
Thank you. Good morning. Today we are focusing on the emerging fusion industry and the role of the supply chain. We all know that the fusion sector is growing at pace. It's a new industry with new ways of working, which is key. It holds huge opportunity, not just for the developers, but for the supply chain too. As we know, that fusion is growing in the supply chain, but we have many challenges. With near full employment in the economy, a lack of STEM apprentices and graduates and skills in the country, plus the infrastructure endeavours in large-scale nuclear, rail and transportation programs, just to name a few. The challenges are huge. So moving on from that backdrop, the first question is, how can fusion compete against this? And I'd like to pass that one over to Greg first.
I think you've heard so far today the amount of exciting projects that are actually happening. Okay. Can you hear me now? Yeah. So we've heard today about some of the exciting projects that are already underway right now around the world and in the UK. So I think, and that ultimate challenge that we're talking about, not just energy, clean energy, but also energy security. So I think the challenge there is, why wouldn't you want to be involved in this industry? Why wouldn't people want to come and work in this part of the industry rather than other major projects, other big infrastructure projects? So I think what I'd be saying is, this is the place to be. We need to be selling that. And the other point is, we have a tendency to talk about the future, which is absolutely right. We've got a lot of things to do, but it's right now. There are major projects going on right now that require the skills and expertise of people. And that's the other thing. This is a challenge. People love challenges. These are technical challenges, business challenges, industrial challenges, engineering challenges. So I think we've got to build that excitement to attract people into the industry.
Thanks, Greg.
Yeah, and maybe I can add 2 points on that. I think fully echo what you were saying. I think there's 2 dominating topics for the next decade. One will be artificial intelligence in software, and it will be fusion in hardware. And I think people who want to work on cutting-edge technology will want to go into fusion. And I agree, we need to communicate better, we need to build this industry. That's why we're here today, and we need more of this. But I'm strongly convinced that people will want to go into this industry. And I also see, like, especially the younger generation, when I talk to them, people want to work on topics that have impact. They want to work on purposeful topics. And is there a better topic with bigger impact than fusion industry if we look back to the first talk this morning of like everything that is ahead of us in terms of climate change? And fusion for me is the technology with the biggest lever to actually tackle that. So I'm optimistic, yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, I mean, if I can add to that, you know, we talk a lot about challenges. You know, I work with engineers every day and they're always telling me about the challenges associated with fusion. But I think you used the word opportunity, Matt, and I think that's a really important word when we look at the industry and the supply chain. You know, we've alluded to, you know, the need for fusion and how much fusion we're going to need out there to solve the challenge that we have. hundreds, possibly thousands of fusion power plants in the future. That is a massive opportunity for the supply chain, some of which exists today, some of which, exists in terms of capability but not capacity, and then other elements which really are still at a research stage, which we need to encourage to invest. I think the other thing for me is that in order to rise to this challenge, we need to start moving more quickly. I think what we see is there are a lot of private fusion companies now who are talking about moving to pilot plant demonstrations in the first half of the 2030s, using that as a platform to deploy commercial fusion in the 2030s. So that means that opportunity for the supply chain and for partners starts now. So I think we really need to have that engagement.
You mentioned it then, Ross. We talk about tens, if not hundreds of thousands of fusion power plants in the future, cited by 2050. How does the supply chain get involved to support people like yourselves as developers? And I'll give that one to you, Ross, again.
Well, I think, as I said, there are opportunities now. Ourselves and other private fusion companies are in the process of designing and building prototype plants that we're looking to have, operational in the 2020s. We're talking about the next stage being pilot plants in the 2030s, and then the commercial plants. All of these programs, we're not going to do that in isolation. As Nick said this morning, we're not in the manufacturing, we're not in the construction business. So we want to work with partners now who are going to come with us on that journey through prototype, through pilot, into commercial plant.
Thank you. Heike,
Yep.
you're quite new as an organisation, 2019. Where are you on that programme at this moment in time?
So we are pursuing a laser-based approach, and the good thing about laser-based approaches is that there are laser facilities out there that we can leverage to validate our physics, and we have been doing that quite successfully over the past 2 years, have been shooting more than 2,000 experiments at existing laser facilities. We are now at a point where we started to also upgrade existing laser facilities. Another benefit that we have as a laser-based approach, that we can actually upgrade existing facilities, and then the next step for us thereafter would be to build our first, our own demonstrator plant. And I think maybe building here on what I've just heard, I think if you look out there, of all the more than 30 private fusion companies, more than 50% of them have announced that they want to build their own prototype demonstrator within the next 5 years. So I think that is an amazing opportunity for suppliers along the supply chain to become involved now, because if you're already involved in those prototype stages, you have a good chance of also being the go-to partner for all the later steps to come. So I think now is really the moment in time where companies should get engaged.
Perfect.
I was going to say exactly the same. If you think about all those projects and all the people who've got money to spend, the supply chain, will respond to that. So what does supply chain need? Supply chain needs to see programs of work, ideally certainty in programs of work, and they need to see money. They need to see the money that gets spent, whether that's public or private. So I think from the supply chain, we should be viewing this as a new industry with a number of players in it who all, have programs that need support. And, I think somebody asked earlier, when's the time to get involved? It really is now, because you get involved now, you understand what is required, what kind of is needed, and then get involved for the future. So I think, I'm contradicting myself. We are at the start of a new industry, but it's been going for a number of years, but it is exponentially growing, and we've got to react to it.
And maybe I can just add some numbers here. I mean, it's a 40 trillion market assessed by Bloomberg, the whole fusion industry. So it's like one of the biggest markets to become involved into. If I would be a company that can somehow assess any part of that value chain, I would totally look into it, because the market is, you said 10,000 power plants by 2050. I mean, that is 10,000 multi-billion sites. So that is big.
I think one of the other points there is that even though a lot of the ventures out there are pursuing quite different approaches, there is a lot of what we do which is common. A lot of the areas of technology that need to be developed and taken forward, they are common across the different types of fusion technology. So it's not just getting involved with one company. It really is going to develop into an industry where there are multiple players all requiring partners and suppliers to work with them.
So there's some crazy numbers there, which I think we're all interested in, and the opportunity that can bring. So from the supply chain, obviously you need the supply chain, but what skills do you actually need from the supply chain? And is it different from different technologies as well?
So I think there is, as you said, there are some common topics, especially I think on the power plant side. And I think here all the companies, I think nobody is pursuing a way where they want to build all of that by themselves. If I wanted to build that all by myself, I would need to hire tens of thousands of power plant engineers now, which I'm not, right? So, and I think nobody is. So I think there is a huge opportunity there. I think if we look at like what is, there are so many common topics, especially on the power plant. I think then the different technologies have their challenges along the supply chain. Now for us pursuing a laser-based approach, things like laser diodes, laser glass, laser crystals, if we want to build power plants at scale, all of these topics exceed today's production worldwide. So we will need more laser diodes than are currently being produced worldwide. So these are massive capacities that will need to be built up along the supply chain to cater us. And same topic for Tokamaks on the magnets.
Yeah, I think that's right. We're going to need to move from an industry that has been very sort of project orientated into something that is more of a volume manufacturing and supply. So, I talked earlier about the capacity. So in some areas, for example, the manufacture of HTS material for our magnets, the capability exists. There are, several credible suppliers around the globe who have technology that can actually produce this material. But at the moment, the capacity isn't there because, based on the numbers that you talked about, Matt, 10,000 power plants, that requires, in excess of 100,000 magnets. That's in excess of millions of kilometers of HTS material. So it is really a step change from sort of batch production into volume production to support that type of market opportunity.
And maybe I can draw one parallel here. If we look into the space industry, and there are all these numbers out there, like now wanting to shoot up more than 40,000 satellites into the space and so on. Also, the private space companies quickly realized that they can't only can't rely on the NASA suppliers themselves. So they started to build up a new supply chain, but also leveraging players outside of that traditional NASA supply chain, looking into automotive industry, looking into mobile phone manufacturers, looking into semiconductor industry, looking into automotive suppliers and so on. So going to new suppliers along the value chain because they also saw that the capacity of the traditional NASA suppliers would not be enough to shoot up 40,000 satellites into space. And I think something very similar will happen to our industry. We need to look really in different areas, like where can we find those players along the industry ecosystem.
And Greg, from your point of view from the supply chain, how is your organisation and how have you seen other organisations adapting to the challenges that are coming?
So why is our organisation involved in Fusion? We're committed to energy transition and our role is project management, technical solutions and engineering of complex engineering and make it real. And that is Fusion. That we're trying to help move the industry into an industry to make it real. So we talked about manufacturability, we talked about big infrastructure projects, engineering and organisation. That's what we're trying to do. And I think what we're seeing is a number of primes, if we call it like that, in supply chain terminology, primes who have got a demand and the supply chain in the tiers are involved. So project we're involved in at the moment with UKAEA, Chimera, it's a single project, there's 63 suppliers, 53 of them are SMEs and 50 have never been involved in Fusion before. And that's just one project and there's multiple projects like that around the globe. So people are starting to get involved and people are getting that experience so that when we do get to the stage where we've got multi-plants, there's enough experience in the supply chain to understand what's required and actually deliver it. So I keep saying it's actually now. So the two things I'd point people to, the UK government's energy fusion strategy launched a year ago. If anybody wants to kind of the start and the basics of what the UK is trying to do. That's a valid document. And the Fusion Cluster document, you know, the Fusion Cluster is attempting to start to bring together that supply chain in the UK. And, you know, hopefully we get more and more people involved and start to create that excitement around the opportunities that are coming.
Yeah, the Fusion Cluster is key as well. I think in excess of 150 organisations have signed up to that, and it'd employ you to join that as well. Question for you, Heike. Your background has not always been fusion. Obviously, you've been in automotive and other sectors and consultancy across your career. What best learning could you bring from other sectors into our sector to help enable it?
So, I mean, if I look in the automotive industry, which is an industry that I spent more than 10 years in before joining Fusion, I think there is three things that we can learn from the automotive industry. I think the automotive industry was really pushing standardization and modularization, and other than that, they could have not built like all that global appearance that they have. And I think standardization and modularization will be key for our industry as well. Otherwise, we will not be able to build 10,000 power plants. Not all of there needs to be standardized components in there for us. There need to be standardized lasers in there and so on. Otherwise, you will not be able to develop that. And also the power plant design itself needs to be modular and scalable and standardized to be scalable. I think that is learning number one. I think learning number two from the automotive industry is strong partnerships. So whether that's JVs or whether that's that other forms of partnerships, there have been always really strong partnerships between OEMs, but also OEMs with tier one suppliers and so on. So I think that is learning number two for me. And learning number three is that innovation has to happen across the whole supply chain. So it's not only been the OEMs who have been pushing innovation, but it's always also been the suppliers. Otherwise, we would not have autonomous driving, electric cars, and so on. So I think there is value pots along the supply chain. And I think that's the third thing we can learn from the automotive industry.
Okay, thank you. Ross, have you got anything to add there? Was there anything you've adapted in Tokamak?
I think Heike has picked up on one of the key points, and I think Nick Hawker also talked about it this morning, which is the standardization and replication. You don't want to have each individual power plant to a different design. You know, in order to achieve the volumes, to establish the manufacturing, to achieve the cost targets, we need to make and our model within Tokamak Energy is that each plant is standardized as much as we possibly can, is factory manufactured, so you can get those benefits of replication, of scale, and ultimately that will drive the cost down. So I think that's a really important point for all of us.
Anything to add there, Greg?
I think so. I think it's all been covered.
And the next question, Greg, is to you, is as an engineering company in this sector, how do you, listening to the learning that has been pushed forward here, the challenges that these organisations have got, do you see your organisation augmenting or changing to support fusion in the future?
I think absolutely it'll be about developing the supply chain below us, so the SMEs, the technical experts, and a whole range. So yeah, and I think we've also kind of glossed over manufacturing and construction, you know, so all those will be required. So I think somebody said the boring bits, you know, those boring bits still have to be done to marry up with the technology, and that's where you do get into you know, competing demands from other industries because of the same skills. And if we kind of go right back, there's a bigger agenda here about making sure we've got the right kind of skills generally for the UK. So engineering, management, project management, scientific, and back to STEM. So I think the other part I think that we've got to do as a fusion industry is start, you know, we've got an opportunity here to design a new industry and make it how we want it. So anybody who's involved in change management in organisations or changing direction of an organisation knows how difficult it is. We've got the golden opportunity here to set up the industry how we want it to be. So more diverse, more inclusive, more rooted in social value into the communities people are working in. We can design all that in by the way that things are procured. So that's the other exciting part here, that it's not just about jobs, and it's not just about more people getting involved and more work. We can actually kind of create that social value out of these large projects.
Perfect. What role do you think a public-funded initiative like STEP plays in stimulating the whole fusion sector, including the commercial private initiatives? Would you take that one, Ross?
Yeah, I think you know, I think there is an important role for, you know, the public fusion in developing the industry. I think you know, what STEP has helped to do over the last 3 or 4 years has stimulate the supply chain. You know, people are talking about wanting to be a supplier into the fusion industry, and I think STEP has really helped raise that profile, certainly here in the UK. And I think, you know, for me, one of the important things in delivering fusion is that the public sector and the private sector work together in partnership. You know, we each have our strengths and we each have our roles in delivering ultimately commercial fusion. And I think, you know, it's really important that there is that collaboration. You know, there are a lot of areas where we are trying to address common challenges, whether they be technical challenges, whether they be challenges around the regulation, whether they be in terms of communication and education in terms of, you know, what fusion is about and what it has to offer. So I think there really is an important role for both public and private players.
And maybe here I can also draw that parallel to the space industry again, where for like SpaceX wouldn't be there if NASA wouldn't have been their anchor supplier or customer from the start, right? And I think that is a role that public institutions can play right now. And I think, as you said, STEP is a good initiative for suppliers now to become involved and so on, knowing it's a publicly funded project. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, loaded question.
I was just going to say, it's an evolution, isn't it? So, you know, public funding projects, we're now seeing a lot more private funded. That collaboration is starting between the public and the private. We probably should stop saying public and private. They're all fusion. You know, doesn't matter how they're funded, they're all fusion projects. But you know, I think also in the UK we're not very good at actually talking about success. And if you look at the, you know, the funding and the programme of UKAEA and the benefits that it's had, you know, that is why we're here. That is why, you know, in the area around Culham we're getting inward investment from other parts. The UK has a lead in fusion, so we need to keep reminding people of that, and you know, keep going. And as you saw on the videos, there's lots of people around the world catching up. There's lots of people investing, so we've got to keep moving along. So I think we're sometimes a bit we're not very good at saying how wonderful the fusion work is in the UK and how much we're doing. So, yeah, just a point.
I've got a loaded question, which is always good. How quick do you think the supply chain needs to develop to support fusion?
I mean, I think from our perspective, you know, it needs to start now. You know, I've talked about some of the ambitious timeframes that we have for our prototype, our pilot and commercial plants. In order for the supply chain to develop the capability and the capacity to support that, you know, we need to start that journey now. So again, sort of going back to where we started the conversation, you know, we want to engage with partners and suppliers who are going to work with us through that journey and help deliver, you know, commercial fusion power plants in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, maybe building on that. So timing is definitely now, because I think if we want to achieve the ambitious timelines that we all have, we will need to do physics validation in parallel to technology development. I think all of us know we still have some physics challenges to tackle and to validate and to prove, but if we do it in an iterative way where we wait until the last physics questions is solved before we go into tech development, we won't have fusion before 2050 or whatever, and I think that's definitely too late for the world. Maybe not for the world, but for humankind. The world might survive this, but we definitely need fusion as soon as possible. I think we are all aware of that, and to achieve that, we need to do things in parallel, and we need to develop the technology now.
I'd go back to right to the beginning. What does supply chain need? They need to see programs. They need to see where the opportunities are, and if they see certainty enough in the future, then supply chain will invest. Will invest in the right people, probably the larger companies first, and then smaller ones. But also the technology companies, you know, they if they can see those programs, then they'll invest in the technology and R&D.
But maybe I can add one thing on that, like, because you asked me a question about automotive industry before, right? Here also suppliers already stepped in, like they knew autonomous driving and things will come, and they started their own R&D programs before OEMs awarded them with R&D projects and so on. So I think this is also the opportunity for the players within the supply chain to start their own R&D programs and to also invest into it. Otherwise, it will also be super difficult to build this ecosystem. So I think the responsibility is not only on the public and on the, if we consider us as kind of OEMs, but like as the fusion companies, but also along the supply chain for companies who want to be involved in there to also start their initiatives. It's a $40 trillion market, so there is an opportunity out there, and then companies can also not just wait to be awarded with a portion in STEP or ITER or NIF or somewhere else.
And I think it's a slight change in mindset. It's you know, we've talked about there is that massive opportunity out there, and you know, opportunities don't come without risk. And I think, you know, it's about being able to make that judgment and say, you know, okay, fusion industry isn't established today, but we believe it's going to be there. Therefore, we are going to take the risk, and we are going to start investing in developing new capabilities or scaling up existing capabilities to meet that opportunity.
Yeah, fully agree.
Perfect. Well, we've come to the point in the session now where we open up to, the hand's already up. Already? Oh gosh. Anyway, so we've come to that point now where we're going to ask questions. Can you please wait till the microphone reaches you, and then please stand up, mention your name and your organisation, and obviously ask the question.
Yes, hello, I'm Wesley McCullough from TÜV Nord, Germany. I have a two-part question. Ross Morgan mentioned earlier the regulatory difficulties. And so the question really is, first off, does the panel see a need for an international regulatory framework to ease this transition from the science to industry? And the second part is, what sort of current regulatory hurdles do you see that stand in the way of building fusion power plants?
I mean, I think in answer to the first question, I think, yes, that would be ideal if we could have harmonization of regulation for fusion across the different countries. You know, that would make standardization and repetition much more straightforward. I think with the best will in the world, that probably isn't going to happen, or certainly not going to happen in the short term. But I think, you know, there are countries like the UK and the US who are taking a lead in this and looking at regulation and looking at what is appropriate and what is proportionate. And I think, you know, we're seeing that the approach, certainly in the UK, and I think it's going in the same direction in the US, is that fusion needs to be regulated in a different way to fission, because the risks and the hazards involved are very different. So I think that approach that the UK government have taken towards a fusion regulation is very enabling. And I think that's, again, perhaps why we're seeing sort of more people sort of moving into the UK because of that regulatory environment. But yeah, harmonization across different territories would make that a lot easier.
I mean, big compliment to the UK and the US. I mean, those are the two countries that I would also see worldwide as the ones taking the lead in coming up with white papers for a regulatory framework. And I think that is super important, because it's also, again, it's a super important signal that the countries believe in fusion playing a major role in the future, and it's again a strong signal towards the market that fusion is coming, and that's why we are here today.
That's perfect. And I just wanted to tie in that obviously this is a hybrid event, and we've got online questions, and that links in perfectly with one of the questions that's been asked from one of our viewers online. Who's next? Hands up. I will go for the lady the furthest away, the biggest challenge for you to run across, because you had a hand up first. Again, your name, your organisation, and question, please.
Yeah, Kate Lancaster, York Plasma Institute. So Obviously, there's lots of opportunities with fusion. It's quite focused in the south. So what are your strategies? Well, is a bit, right? So what are your strategies for, well, STEP is now going to be in West Burton. How can we spread the love a bit? How can we use it as a tool? Sorry, it's a very UK-focused question. But how can we use it as a tool for uplift in other regions?
Good.
Yeah, so I'm from the north. Our organisation is based in the north. But I think it's back to that, you know, kind of the example I gave. Those 63 organisations are not all in Oxford. They're around the country, in Scotland, or some are abroad. We'd like them all to be in the UK. But, you know, if you look at the job map of where all the actual jobs and where the actual companies are actually delivering that work, it's not all in Oxford. And as you've just mentioned, you know, a Rotherham and a focus in West Burton, it kind of changes the dimension as well. But so I think there's a number of ways you can do it, and part of that will be the procurement. But I'd say, you know, a large proportion of the work is being currently done in the north.
Okay.
And just support the north there.
Next question over here at the front. This gentleman in the green shirt. I've lost my roving microphone. No, we need it so we can hear you online. Just here. Just put your hand back up, please.
Hi, Hans van Zut from McDermott. Really simple question for Ross and Heike. What's the end game for you guys? Do you see yourselves as OEMs or asset owners of a fusion power plant? What's the goal?
I mean, from our perspective, we don't see ourselves as either building or operating the power plants. We see ourselves as developing and licensing core elements of the technology. You know, that can be both in terms of some of the key components and systems, but also in terms of the operation and control that's required to, you know, to run our devices in the future. And that's why for us, you know, as I've said, it's really important that we do identify and work with partners earlier who have that complementary capability, who, you know, have the manufacturing expertise, who have the construction expertise, people who are ultimately going to operate the power plants.
Yeah, I can only build on that. So I think we always consider our core IP being the fusion process itself, and for us especially this laser target interaction and how to make fusion work with, like, shooting with a laser on a structured fuel pellet. So that is our core IP. And we will never be the ones building and operating all these power plants alone.
Thank you. I'm going to take one of the questions just for a second off online here, please. With the existing suppliers need to pivot for the lowest tenders for R&D for the ITER, the JT60, for example, to fastest delivery for industrialisation. This will need investment, as we all know. How can SMEs grow to provide this without confirmed requirements and repeatability? So I think we're looking at here now, how do we support the SME community, as we mentioned, Greg mentioned before. Have you got any ideas on how we can enable this, how we can grow this capability in our SMEs?
I mean, I think, you know, the SME proportion of the market is really important, because, you know, a lot of the new ideas, the new technology, the new component subsystems is coming from SMEs as well as the more well-established suppliers. I think in terms of that, you know, we try to work with the best people in their field, whether they're an SME or whether they're, you know, an established large-scale engineering company. And I think what we're moving to now is, with the way that we're approaching it, of having, you know, multiple plants, prototypes, pilot plants, commercial plants coming up in fairly quick succession. That, as I say, we're trying to move away from a single project-based industry where there are, you know, repeat orders and multiple opportunities going forward.
I give you anything?
Yeah, I mean, as we were saying earlier, I mean, there's a couple of topics that will be similar across the different fusion players in the industry. And if of the 30 plus private companies, more than 50% of them now want to build something in the next 5 years, I mean, that's more than one order, right? I mean, that should be a fair amount of orders, and especially for companies who are involved in topics that are relevant across different fusion players. I think these are areas, but I mean, I fully understand the question. I fully understand where it's coming from. It also ties back to what I said earlier about the state also being an anchor customer to give some confidence into the supply chain and so on, that there are orders, that there is volume. I think these topics are super important at the beginning when you want to build a supply chain.
I think the last thing, there's a number of innovation programs. So UKAEA run a fusion innovation program, small amount of money to kind of kickstart some things for SMEs, you know, and some of the bigger companies do it as well. So, and other government programs. So there's different ways to get involved in R&D.
Perfect. I think we can take one more question from the room. I'm going to take the gentleman over there, if that's okay. Again, if you can mention your name and the organisation.
Hello, I'm Phil Greatorex, and I'm the UK Nuclear Heritage Lead based at Sellafield. Now, one of the features of the early fission programme and one of the sort of key enablers to the industrialisation of our Magnox and advanced gas-cooled reactor fleet was that the development was supported by 7 national laboratories who were devoted not to sort of theoretical research but to applied research. So thinking about the fusion programme, how confident are we that the supply chain will be able to provide the necessary applied research to achieve its aims?
We'll give that one to you, Greg.
Well, we do have our own laboratories and our own facilities in Jacobs, but we're a bigger company, so we can do that. Yeah, a lot of those, as you quite rightly said, a lot of those laboratories and test facilities went in the nuclear industry. I think the answer is, again, I'll keep repeating myself. You know, companies will invest, companies will set up facilities, companies will see opportunities and to invest and grow for a market. And you know, I think what we're trying to do today is look at the evidence, look at all the information. There is a market here. So being a pure business person, you know, there's opportunity. There's opportunity which will require investment. It may be investment in facilities, it may be investment in skills, it may be investment purely in understanding this market. But yeah, I'd look very carefully at all the information and make your own mind up. But I think there's a big opportunity here, and that's why we're involved.
I can take one more question. Can we take it at the front? No, we need the microphone, unfortunately, so everyone can hear online. It's going to be a quick fire question.
My question is for Ross and Heike regarding the fundraising. Whom would you see in private sector as the best suited investors? And how easy do you find nowadays to raise funds?
I mean, I can take that. I mean, currently our investors cover a wide range of different backgrounds, from high net worth individuals to institutional investors. I think going forward we will continue to see growth in that area, but I think also we're starting to see a lot more interest from strategic investors, corporate investors who, you know, not just looking at the financial return on their equity investment, but are also looking at the opportunity to be part of the fusion journey as well.
Yeah, maybe adding 2 thoughts on that. I think on the one side, we have really seen fusion now not only being a topic by high net worth individuals investing into it, but really traditional VCs investing into it. So I think that's an amazing sign. I think what we are also seeing now is that investors who have already invested into one technology are now looking to hedge their investment with also doing a second investment or a third investment, especially given that there are laser-based companies, magnet-based companies, and so on. So, and I think we've also heard that from the lady in two panels back. And so I think these are good signs. And I think right now as an investor, I mean, it's a huge opportunity if fusion is coming. So not being part of it is actually something that you cannot really risk not being part of it. So you have to be part of it, I would say. And then hedging your investments in 2 or 3 companies can make a lot of sense as well. So I think that's positive. Maybe one grain of salt here, if we look at this like 4.6 billion that have been invested into fusion last year, 90% has been invested in the US. So I don't want to end our session with a negative comment, so maybe you have to round it all up. But I think there's a huge opportunity here in Europe as well, and we need to step up as a European ecosystem as well here.
Thanks, Heike. I think, just to summarize the session, I think the things I've just heard, I think we've got the building blocks. I think that was key when it came across. There's definitely opportunity and investment, and I think I picked on something you said, it was excitement was across the panel, and success. We understand the challenges. That's what made this sector great, I think. That was a key point. We want to try things differently. So I think that makes a pretty compelling story. Underpin that with the LFE as well from other industries and the best practices. So I hope you all agree. So as I draw this session to a close, we'd like you to join me in a round of applause, please, for Ross, Heike and Greg and their insights and your fantastic questions. Thanks, Matt.